Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the most famous example of racial profiling in American history. It involved the internment of over 100,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. This resulted from a presidential executive order by Franklin D. Roosevelt. And we're going to look at some of the arguments that the government made as to why they believe this was necessary. We're going to listen to some interviews with Japanese Americans who discussed their experience. And a big question for us, did the government do the right thing? So we're going to get started over on the Reading on Google Classroom. I will see you over there.
Japanese American Internment. FDR authorizes forced relocation of Japanese Americans. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, authorizing military commanders to designate exclusion zones, from which any or all persons may be excluded. This measure led to the internment, forced relocation, and imprisonment without trial into war relocation camps of approximately 120,000 inhabitants of Japanese ancestry residing along the Pacific coast during the years of 1942 to 46. Those interned had as little as 6 days to dispose of their houses and most of their possessions. Many were forced to sell their property at well under market value. Immigration status of Japanese Americans was divided into 3 categories. Issei, born in Japan, ineligible for U.S. citizenship. Nisei, born in the United States, first-generation immigrants, citizens. And Sansei, children of Nisei, born in the U.S., second-generation immigrants, citizens. Fully 2/3 of those Japanese Americans relocated were Nisei and Sansei, U.S. citizens. They had grown up in American cities, attended American schools, and considered themselves American. Of the remaining resident aliens, all had lived in the United States for at least 18 years, since American borders had been closed to Japanese immigrants since the 1924 Asian Exclusion Act. Now, before we hear some of the perspectives of Japanese Americans who lived through this experience, we're going to look at some of the arguments that were made at the time in favor of this internment policy. And to start this off, we're going to look at a cartoon by Dr. Seuss. And this cartoon says, "Waiting for the signal from home." First off, you'll notice this huge crowd of people, and they're traveling along the west coast of the United States. You can see Washington, Oregon, California. These are Japanese Americans. They're lining up to pick up TNT, which is explosives. There's a sign on the building. It says Honorable Fifth Column. You may not be familiar with that phrase, but a fifth column basically means if an enemy is invading a foreign land, the fifth column are the people who are already waiting there behind the lines to help them out when they get there. You'll also see there's a guy on the roof of the building who is looking through a telescope towards Japan. And again, it says, "Waiting for the signal from home." Now, obviously, there's a number of questionable arguments being made here about the Japanese Americans. The people drawn here are clearly traitors to the United States. And the suggestion is that they're not even Americans. It says, "Waiting for the signal from home," home being Japan, not the United States. I will come out and say this is a fairly racist cartoon. The way that they're drawn in this picture is pretty insulting. But this was the perspective that some Americans had after Pearl Harbor, was that these people, these Japanese Americans, were not real Americans. They were potential enemies and needed to be locked up in internment camps. Now, to get another perspective on this, I'm going to show you guys a short excerpt from a war propaganda film. This was put out by the United States government to justify the actions that the government took in placing Japanese Americans in these quote-unquote relocation centers. As you watch this, I'd like you to jot down a couple of the arguments that the government is making here. Why do they say this is necessary?
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our west coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous. Most were loyal. But no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move. This picture tells how the mass migration was accomplished. Neither the Army nor the War Relocation Authority relished the idea of taking men, women, and children from their homes, their shops, and their farms. So the military and civilian agencies alike determined to do the job as a democracy should, with real consideration for the people involved. First attention was given to the problems of sabotage and espionage. Now, here at San Francisco, for example, convoys were being made up within sight of possible Axis agents. There were more Japanese in Los Angeles than in any other area. At nearby San Pedro, houses and hotels occupied almost exclusively by Japanese were within a stone's throw of a naval air base, shipyards, oil wells. Japanese fishermen had every opportunity to watch the movement of our ships. Japanese farmers were living close to vital aircraft plants. So as a first step, all Japanese were required to move from critical areas such as these. But of course, this limited evacuation was a solution to only part of the problem. The larger problem, the uncertainty of what would happen among these people in case of a Japanese invasion, still remained. That is why the commanding general of the Western Defense Command determined that all Japanese within the coastal area should move inland. Immediately, the Army began mapping evacuation areas and for a time encouraged the Japanese to leave voluntarily. The trouble for the voluntary evacuees soon threatened in their new locations, so the program was quickly put on a planned and protected basis. Thereafter, the American citizen Japanese and Japanese aliens made their plans in accordance with Army orders. Notices were posted. All persons of Japanese descent were required to register. They gathered in their own churches and schools, and the Japanese themselves cheerfully handled the enormous paperwork involved in the migration. Civilian physicians made preliminary medical examinations. Government agencies helped in 100 ways. They helped the evacuees find tenants for their farms. They helped businessmen lease, sell, or store their property. Now, this aid was financed by the government, but quick disposal of property often involved financial sacrifice for the evacuees. Now the actual migration got underway. The Army provided fleets of vans to transport household belongings and buses to move the people to assembly centers. The evacuees cooperated wholeheartedly. The many loyal among them felt that this was a sacrifice they could make in behalf of America's war effort.
So we're going to switch gears now, and I'm going to play you some interviews of Japanese Americans describing their experience being interned and what it felt like for them. As you watch this, I'd like you to jot down some notes in question 5.
I went to Seattle in 1942. One memory is very clear and strong. It's a Saturday, and I'm taking a bus into the center of town and across the public square in front of the town hall, I guess it is. And I see ahead of me a line of people standing patiently by a bus stop. And as I approach, I see that they're all Japanese and that they're getting onto buses. And I realize that these are the Japanese American citizens of Seattle and the neighborhood who are being sent off to what amounted to a concentration camp. And I think, well, those are my enemies. But they don't look like enemies standing there in their American clothes with their cardboard suitcases, waiting to be sent off into the desert.
On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt had signed Executive Order 9066. Its tone was carefully neutral, It authorized the War Department to designate military areas and then exclude anyone from them whom it felt to be a danger. But it had a specific target. The more than 110,000 people of Japanese ancestry living along the West Coast. They were about to be forced from their homes and moved inland. Thousands of German and Italian aliens were also locked up. But millions of German and Italian American citizens remained free to live their lives as they always had. Only Japanese Americans on the West Coast were singled out. "A Jap's a Jap," said General John L. DeWitt of the West Coast Defense Command. "It makes no difference whether he's an American citizen or not. I don't want any of them." Almost no one protested the government's plan, which also classified all Japanese Americans as unfit for military service.
1A is physically fit, 4F, something's wrong with you. Well, 4C means enemy alien, and here I was, 17 years of age. I considered myself a good American, but made into an enemy.
In Sacramento, soon after Order 9066 was issued, hand-lettered signs went up all over town saying, "Japs must go." The orders to leave arrived in May. Susumu Sato and his family could scarcely believe it. They were given 1 week's notice.
It was middle of harvest, but still, yeah, we had to abandon it and leave. And so, of course, we made arrangement with our friends. Hey, come and pick the strawberries because it's ready to be marketed. And so I imagine they did that.
There was an area of town here in Sacramento that was mostly where the Japanese lived. And it was empty almost overnight. And we wondered, what happened. They took somebody out of 8th grade, a Japanese boy who did wonderful cartoons. His name was Sammy. And one day he was there, and the next day he was gone. And that was very difficult for us to understand because we didn't see Sammy or any Japanese, at least I didn't, any Japanese American as the enemy.
We were allowed to bring whatever you could carry, that's it. And so you put just essentials in your suitcase. First day when we had to pack up our thing and go to the train, I really wondered what's going to happen to us. That this is just the beginning and they may very well send us back to Japan. And that to me was horrible. I, in my heart, knew my loyalty belongs to America. I went to school, pledged allegiance every morning in grammar school and so forth. And for me to think that I may be sent to Japan was horrendous.
Asako Takuno was still a freshman at Berkeley that spring. Her parents and her grandfather were evacuated first because they had been born in Japan. She and her sister were left behind for a time to close the family flower business.
We all somehow gathered the flowers, bunched them, and got them to the flower market in San Francisco. And so we were able to keep the business going. And all those flowers didn't go to waste. They're just in the height of their beauty at that time of the year, getting ready for Easter and all the holidays. We were really kind of caught in the middle when the war happened, although no question about our loyalty to our country, and how we felt. This is our country, and when this whole evacuation thing happened, everything was like we had no country, because we weren't from Japan, and they took away our rights, actually. We couldn't protest, and we went to protest it because we had to do what the government told us to do. And so I think our parents realized, of course, they were, not citizens, so they accepted the whole thing. But for us, I think it was a lot harder, the fact that we had no rights.
Now, one of the most famous Supreme Court cases in history involved this question of whether the government had a right to intern Japanese Americans. It was based on the case of a young man named Fred Korematsu, who was from Oakland, California. I would like you to read the facts of the case and summarize them in question number 6 and explain what the court's decision was in question 7. When you're done, I would like you to write a summary paragraph. Did the U.S. government have good reason to intern Japanese Americans? I'd like you to use specific evidence from the reading and from the videos.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this lesson and learned something along the way. When we come back here on Wednesday, we're going to talk about the atomic bomb. You may know the United States was the only country in history to ever use an atomic bomb on another country. We're going to look at some of the arguments for and against the use of the bomb. I look forward to having that discussion with you later this week. Until then, I hope you guys are doing your best to stay safe, and I will see you soon.